Hi, this presentation will go over the Trauma Informed Practice module for Child Guidance EDU 146. So just before we get started, wanting to make sure you are aware that the content in this presentation is focused on child trauma, and it's meant to help you as you work with children and families. There's so much information to know and ways that we can help, but also knowing when to direct them to other resources because we have the capability to do a lot, but there's sometimes things that they need additional help with. And just know that sometimes this can be emotionally draining or triggering for people, just depending on what your experiences are in life. And it can also be a difficult topic to think about. So I want to make sure that if you have any issues or concerns, please let me know, and we can work through a plan or get some support if needed. So the first part is a bunch of definitions to help you understand all the different lingo that goes along with in childhood trauma-informed practice. So the first one is adverse childhood experiences. You may have heard of ACEs, and this was a groundbreaking study done quite a while ago that looked at how abuse, neglect, and then household dysfunction experiences in early childhood can lead to pretty significant health consequences later in life. And there is a link provided here if you want some more specific information about that. Another phrase or definition is toxic stress. So this occurs when a child experiences strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity without the adult support that they need. So that can be any kind of abuse, chronic neglect, caregivers not being present, so substance abuse, mental illness, exposure to violence, and then accumulated burdens of economic hardship. So the more adverse experiences, those ACEs that a child has in early childhood, the greater their likelihood of developing health problems later, but also having some developmental delays. So the research indicates that supportive, responsive relationships with caring adults like you can really help to prevent or reverse the effects of toxic stress. So when someone experiences toxic stress, these types of stress, it can be activating to your nervous system. And when you can't get that to turn off, it's really damaging physically, mentally, emotionally, all of those things. And it can be really toxic, especially for kids because they are developing so many things in childhood. And then types of trauma, there's a video here that's great. It's about like high school age children sharing about trauma. So it's really great to watch if you have a few minutes to do that. And then just being aware of the different types of trauma that can happen. So acute is when something happens one time, like a car accident. Chronic is when it happens over and over and over again. Complex can be just multiple different types of trauma. And then neglect when a caregiver is not providing for child's basic needs. And historical trauma, so things that have happened over several generations, so generational trauma. And then also just systemic oppression, having a society that's set up in a way that causes trauma by treating different types of people differently. And then trauma exposure. So if a child feels really threatened by an event that they witnessed, that could be considered an event trauma. And that has different ranges. So it could be something that happens outside of their family, like the car accident, a natural disaster, racial trauma, immigration trauma, something happening suddenly. And then some things that might happen inside their family could be domestic violence, abuse of some kind, medical trauma, neglect, or someone passing away. And then traumatic events are any kind of frightening, dangerous, or violent event that poses a threat to the child's life or body. So this happens directly to them. So while witnessing a traumatic event can be traumatic, this actually is a traumatic event looking at how it is affecting them directly. So those can create long-lasting emotions and physical reactions. They might feel terror, helplessness, fear, heart pounding, vomiting, loss of bowel or bladder control, and they just don't have the ability to protect themselves and not having an adult who's stepping in to do that for them. So they can just be incredibly overwhelmed. And this really is identified through what they call the 3 E's. So the event, what happens, the experience, and then the effects, short term, long term, how it impacts them. So here's where the early childhood professionals really come in. So the relationship piece. So we are learning about trauma because we already know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If a child's needs are not being met, one of the very basic ones being to be safe, to be fed, to have a safe place to sleep at night, then we cannot get them to a point where they can learn. And so, as caregivers, we can really support a child in meeting those basic needs, but then also moving up to that safety and security and love and belonging and helping through just positive, nurturing relationships and interactions that children feel safe, secure, and ready to learn. And there's a great video here you can watch. So, relationships in the early years are very important. You may have heard about the theory of attachment from John Bowlby, and it really explains how children are born with this innate need to form an attachment to someone in order to survive. And the first 5 years of life, particularly the first 3, are really when attachment development happens. And if it doesn't, it often leads to significant issues later in life. So, early childhood is that critical piece of development, not only for all the things we already know with language and cognitive and social skills and movement, but also how their brain is going to develop over time. So, being in a responsive and nurturing environment creates a brain that looks one way, and then being in a traumatic environment where you experience traumatic events or traumatic stress really creates a brain that looks very different. So, if that happens over time, that impact on the brain just continues to be more significant and really then impacts their relationships, how they learn, and how they handle stress. So, caregivers, early childhood providers, can make a difference in changing the structure of the child's brain through sensitive, kind, and respectful care, which is why it's so important to learn about trauma informed practice. So, those positive relationships, being attuned to a child's needs, learning how to support them when they struggle is really critical and a great way to impact a child's life. So, as professionals, we can really be the change agent that allows children to rewrite their life stories, regardless of what has happened in their life. So, some ways to support children's healthy attachment. We really want kids to be safe, seen, soothed, and secure, knowing that there is an adult that will show up for them, that they are present and they are paying attention to what a child is doing. So, not that we take away all the things that are hard, but just to help them through challenging moments by being connected and empathetic, allowing them to feel, but also be part of the problem solving process. And so, repeated experiences of that will really help children feel secure in the knowledge that they are good, they have power, and their needs will be met. And that creates a foundation for how they see themselves, others, and the world. And there is a researcher named Robin Goebel who has lots of information about attachment. So her website is there. You can find a ton of resources on her site. So, kids and stress. And you may already know this from your own personal experiences, but there are physical manifestations of stress, even in young children. And I think sometimes adults forget that kids experience things just as stressful as adults might. So we really need to be able to support them and help them develop those coping strategies so that they can be resilient. So there are just some indicators there of stress symptoms you might see in a child. So getting sick a lot, crying or whining, having a fear or that's new or reoccurring, being aggressive or angry or easily irritable, stubborn, having trouble concentrating. And then those physical things like intolerance to foods, having trouble falling asleep, getting sick often, things like that. And then this is just an infographic that shows some responses to trauma or things that you might see, the stress response in kids. So that fight, flight, or freeze. And this one doesn't include fawn, which is another one that's possible. And that's really when you see people pleasing, children trying to please adults without sort of taking into account their own needs or desires. But this is often what adults see that I think is labeled challenging behavior, right? And so things to just be aware of and what that might actually be telling you about a child's needs. And then the nervous system response to trauma. So this shows you in that green section at the bottom, the social engagement. That's where we want children to be connected, safe, grounded, curious in the moment. When they have some sort of toxic stress, their arousal increases, meaning their nervous system is activated, and they will go into fight or flight in the orange with the upset, anger, frustration, um, worry, concern. And if they don't find a way to regulate and get out of that, they can move into that freeze. And that's really where they start to disassociate and shut down, which is really dangerous. So we really want to find ways to help them be in that green social engagement to feel safe and connected. So, what does this all mean? The most important thing to remember is there's always a reason behind behavior exhibited by young children, and it's important for us to help identify what might be happening in their environment or within their brain and body to understand the reason for the behavior. So, if you think a child is showing signs of stress, talk with their family, ask other professionals for help. Children always handle stress better when they have love and support of a caring, nurturing adult, which can be you. Children's resilience can be strengthened through those positive relationships with people that they interact with on a regular basis. So in the classroom, it starts with you as an early childhood educator. And then the quote here from the CDC: adopting a trauma-informed approach is not accomplished through any single particular technique or checklist. It requires constant attention, caring awareness, sensitivity, and possibly a cultural change at an organizational level. And I think that kind of describes early childhood in general. It really is a profession that requires that we be constantly monitoring, constantly aware of what's happening, and really trying to figure out the relationships and the connections and helping kids through challenges. So after you get all of this information, you can then work on your reflection, and those questions will be posted for you there too. All right, I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have questions.